keep records. It's something I picked up 40 years ago when I was doing bookkeeping for a small construction outfit in Raleigh, and it never left me. Receipts, dates, account numbers, notes on conversations, I write things down. My wife used to tease me about it. She said I'd document the weather if I thought it would matter later. She wasn't entirely wrong. I'm 69 years old. I live alone now. My wife Sandra passed 3 years ago from a stroke that came out of nowhere on a Tuesday morning. She was making coffee. I was in the backyard pulling weeds. By the time I got inside, she was on the floor. And everything after that happened too fast and too slow at the same time. I don't talk about it much. There's not a lot to say that makes it easier. We had one daughter. Her name is Melissa. She's 41, lives about 25 minutes away, married to a man named Craig who does something in commercial real estate. I've never been entirely sure what, and I've asked more than once. Craig is the kind of man who talks a great deal without saying very much. He smiles when he disagrees with you. He calls it keeping the peace. I call it something else. After Sandra died, Melissa called more often. She came by on Sundays for a while. She'd bring the grandkids, 2 boys, 8 and 10, and we'd have lunch, and it felt like something was holding together. I appreciated it. I'm not a man who asks for much, but I'm also not a man who doesn't notice when something shifts. The shift came slowly, which is why I almost missed it. It started with questions about the house, not in a way that was obviously wrong. Just comments. Dad, this place is a lot to maintain. Dad, have you thought about downsizing? Dad, do you really need 4 bedrooms? The house is a 3-bedroom on a quiet street in Cary, North Carolina. I've owned it since 1991. Sandra and I painted every room ourselves. I know where every wire runs and where every pipe sits because I did a lot of that work with my own hands. It's not a mansion. It's worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $420,000 now, which is more than either of us ever expected when we bought it for 86. I'd wave the comments off. I'd say I was fine. I was fine. Then Craig started coming on the Sunday visits. He hadn't before. He'd always had something else going on. A golf thing, a work thing. But now he was there, walking through the rooms, opening the garage door and looking at the storage, asking me questions about the HVAC and the roof age, and whether I'd had the water heater inspected recently. I told myself he was just making conversation. I told myself he was trying. Sandra always said I was too hard on Craig. Maybe she was right. But I kept records. The first time I noticed something was off, it was a Wednesday in February. I'd driven up to Henderson for 2 days to help my old friend Bernard settle some things at his storage unit. He'd been moving and needed extra hands. I left early Tuesday morning and came back Thursday afternoon. When I walked in the back door, I noticed the kitchen chair at the breakfast bar was pulled out at a different angle than I leave it. I always push it fully in. It's a habit. The chair was out about 8 inches. Not a lot, but it wasn't how I left it. I walked through the house. The door to my office was ajar. I leave it closed, not locked, just closed. Sandra's habit was the same and I kept it. The filing cabinet drawer, the second one from the top, wasn't fully shut. It wasn't hanging open. It was just not clicked in. About a 1/4 inch. I sat down in my reading chair and I thought for a long time. The filing cabinet has Sandra's death certificate in it, our marriage certificate, the deed to the house, my retirement account statements, the original version of our joint will, which Sandra and I had drawn up in 2018, before she got sick, before any of this. The will left everything to Melissa, which was always the plan. At the time, it made sense. At the time, I didn't see any reason to think twice about it. I didn't say anything to Melissa. I didn't say anything to Craig. I called Bernard that evening and mentioned it like it was nothing, and he said maybe a neighbor had a key. I said maybe, but I knew we'd only ever given one spare key to the house. We gave it to Melissa when she moved out in 2004, in case of emergencies. She still had it. She'd used it twice that I knew of. Once when I had a procedure done, and Sandra asked her to check on the dogs, and once when we were on vacation and a pipe tripped. I changed my approach that Thursday. I didn't change the locks yet. I didn't call Melissa. I didn't do anything loud. I am a bookkeeper by profession and a careful man by temperament. When you find a discrepancy, you don't announce it, you trace it. You find out where it started and how deep it goes before you do anything that can't be undone. I started leaving small markers, a piece of clear tape across the base of the filing cabinet drawer, one that would break if pulled, thin enough not to be obvious, a folded business card under the corner of a specific folder in the second drawer, positioned at a particular angle. I photographed both with my phone before I left the house again. The following weekend, I told Melissa I was driving to Asheville to see my brother-in-law, Sandra's younger brother, who lives out there and is getting on in years. I said I'd be gone Friday through Sunday. I gave her the date clearly. I did not ask her to check on the house. I did not give her any reason to come by. I drove to Asheville on Friday. I came back Sunday afternoon earlier than I said I would. The tape was broken. The business card was on the floor inside the drawer, not where I'd left it. I sat down at the kitchen table and I didn't move for about 15 minutes. I just sat there looking at the window above the sink, the one that faces the backyard, the one Sandra had put a little clay pot of herbs on the sill every spring. I thought about what this meant. Not in a broad, angry way, in a specific way. I thought, what exactly is happening here? And then I thought, what am I going to do about it? I didn't call Melissa that night. I called my attorney instead. His name is Howard Pratt, and he's been handling my affairs for about 12 years. He's not a big-name attorney. He runs a small firm in Morrisville, and he is deliberate and careful in a way that I've always trusted. I told him what I'd found both times. I told him about the chair, the cabinet, the tape, the card. I told him about Craig's questions about the house and the HVAC and the roof. Howard listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I value about him. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Victor, I think you already know what we need to do." I said I thought I did. I just wanted to hear it from him. He said, "First, we update the will. Immediately, not eventually, now." He said there are things we could change that would make any attempt to challenge my capacity significantly more difficult. He said he wanted me to come in Monday morning. I was there at 9. We spent 2 hours in his office. We restructured things substantially. I won't go into every detail, but the important part is this. I established a revocable living trust. The house transferred into the trust. My financial accounts were retitled. I also changed the beneficiary structure, added conditions, and, at Howard's suggestion, had a brief cognitive assessment done by my physician, Dr. Abernathy, the following week. Not because there was anything wrong with me, because Howard said if anyone ever wanted to challenge the trust by claiming I lacked capacity when I signed it, they'd need to argue past a signed physician's note and a formal assessment completed the same week. It was, as Howard put it, closing a door. I also called an old colleague of mine, a man I'd worked with at the construction firm back in the 90s named Fletcher. Fletcher does home security installation now, runs his own small outfit. I asked him to come by and install a system for me. I was specific about what I wanted. Cameras at the front door, the back door, and one in the hallway facing the office. Nothing exotic, all standard equipment, but motion-activated and cloud syncs to my phone. Fletcher had it done in an afternoon. I did not tell Melissa I'd done any of this. She called the following Saturday like she usually did. She asked how Asheville was. I said it was good. Sandra's brother was doing okay. It was a nice drive. She asked how I was feeling. I said fine. She asked, and this is the part I've thought about a great deal since. She asked almost casually, "Dad, have you thought any more about what you want to do with the house long term?" I said, "No, not really. I like it here." She said, "I just worry about you maintaining it alone." I said I appreciated that. She said Craig had mentioned the possibility of them taking it over at some point and me moving somewhere smaller, closer to them maybe. She said it like it was a fresh idea, something Craig had just thought of recently. I said I'd think about it. I wrote down the date and time of the call in my notebook after I hung up. The following Tuesday, I told Melissa I was going to Greensboro for a few days. My former colleague Bernard lives there now, and I said we were going to watch some basketball and have dinner, and that I'd be back Friday. I said it in a regular way, the way you'd say any ordinary thing. I did not make a point of it. I drove to Greensboro Tuesday afternoon. On Wednesday morning at 11:14 a.m., my phone buzzed, the camera app. Motion detected at the back door. I watched it in real time from Bernard's living room, sitting in his armchair with a cup of coffee in my hand. It was Melissa. She came in through the back door with her key. She was alone. She walked straight to my office. She was in there for 22 minutes. When she came out, she had photographs on her phone. I could see the screen light. And she went to the kitchen, opened the cabinet above the refrigerator where I keep a small box with Sandra's jewelry, and she stood looking at it for a long moment before she closed the cabinet and left. She was in my house for 31 minutes total. I watched the whole thing without moving. Bernard asked if I was okay. I said yes. I said I needed to make a call. I called Howard. He said we have what we need. He said I should come back, not make any changes to my behavior, and let him handle the next steps. He said I should not confront her yet. He said the cleanest path forward was documentation, and we now had it. I stayed in Greensboro until Friday as planned. I drove home. I walked in, fed the neighbor's cat that I sometimes watch, checked the house, and sat on the back porch with a glass of iced tea until the sun started going down. I thought about Melissa as a child. She used to sit on this same porch with Sandra, the two of them doing puzzles at the table out here, Sandra reading her the names of the birds they'd see in the yard. Melissa knew every cardinal from a sparrow by the time she was 6. Sandra was proud of that. I thought about how grief does things to people. I thought about Craig, who I have never truly trusted, and whether the idea started with him or with her, or whether it doesn't matter. I thought about the way she'd opened the cabinet above the refrigerator and stood looking at her mother's jewelry. I thought about whether that was greed or grief or both. I think it was both. I think people can be sad and still do wrong things. It didn't make it better. The following week, Howard sent a formal letter to Melissa via certified mail. It was not an accusation. It was a legal notification informing her that the property and estate had been restructured into a trust, that all documents had been updated, and that any future entry into the property without explicit written permission would be considered trespassing. The letter also noted that security cameras were in operation on the premises and that footage had been preserved of recent entries. It did not say what we intended to do with the footage. It didn't need to. It also formally requested the return of the spare key. She called me that same afternoon, about 3 hours after the certified mail tracking showed it delivered. Her voice was different from any way I'd heard it before. Not angry, not apologetic, something in between, tight, controlled. She said, "Dad, what is this?" I said, "You know what it is, Melissa." There was a long silence. She said, "I was just checking on the house." I said, "You didn't tell me you were coming. You didn't call. You went through my filing cabinet. You looked at your mother's jewelry. I have all of it on camera." Another silence. Longer. She said, "Craig thought," and then she stopped. I said, "I know what Craig thought." She started crying. I don't know if it was real or whether it was strategy. Maybe it was real. I sat with it and I didn't soften. I said, "Melissa, I love you. You are my daughter, and that is never going to change. But what you did was not okay. Going through my private papers behind my back, coming into my home without asking, looking into whether you could take this house while I'm still living in it, that's not okay. And I won't pretend that it is." She said she was sorry. She said Craig had convinced her that I wasn't managing things well, that I seemed confused sometimes, that they were worried. I said, "I had a full cognitive evaluation done 3 weeks ago. My physician signed off on it. I am not confused, Melissa. I just don't tell you everything." She didn't have much to say to that. I told her that I still intended to leave her something when the time came. I told her the boys were still in the trust as contingent beneficiaries. I told her that none of that had to change if we could find our way back to something honest. But I also told her that I would not be giving back the spare key, that the locks were being changed the following week, and that visits to the house from now on would be scheduled in advance and through the front door. She mailed the key back 3 days later. No note, just the key in an envelope. The locks were changed the following Tuesday. Fletcher came by and did it in an hour, same as always. I haven't spoken with Craig since. I don't know that there's anything to say to him. Melissa and I have had 2 phone calls since then. Brief, careful, feeling like first steps on ice. The boys still call me on Sundays. The older one told me he wants to learn about accounting when he grows up. I told him I'd teach him. Howard filed the finalized trust documents in late April. Everything is in order. The house is protected. My accounts are titled correctly. If anyone ever tried to claim I was incapacitated when I made those decisions, they'd be arguing against a physician's note, 2 attorney's signatures, and a timestamp. I don't keep the filing cabinet locked. There's nothing in it that would change anything now, but I do still leave the small tape marker on the drawer. Not because I expect anyone to come, just because I'm a careful man, and careful men keep records. A neighbor planted a new dogwood in her yard last spring, right along the fence line where I can see it from the back porch. It's young, maybe 4 feet tall, and it bloomed pale pink this year for the first time. Sandra would have been out here every morning looking at it. She had a thing about flowering trees, said they were the closest thing to a promise that nature made. I think about that sometimes when I sit out here in the evening. The light goes slow this time of year, and the yard gets quiet, and there's nothing I need to do, and nowhere I need to be. I'm okay. That's the whole truth of it. I went through something hard, and I handled it, and I'm okay. There's a dogwood tree next door that bloomed for the first time this spring. Pale pink, 4 feet tall. Sandra would have been out here every morning watching it. I think about that when I sit on the porch in the evening, and I think about everything that led to this moment. The broken tape, the camera footage, the certified letter, the key that came back in an envelope with no note. And I think, what a thing it is to do the right thing quietly. I don't believe the universe sends invoices. I don't think there's a ledger somewhere tallying what people owe each other, but I do believe that actions have weight, and weight has consequences. And you don't always have to be the one collecting. You just have to be patient enough to let things settle on their own. What Melissa and Craig did wasn't a small thing. Coming into my home without asking, going through my private papers, looking at Sandra's jewelry. That was a choice. A series of choices. And every one of them came from a place that had stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as an asset. That's a particular kind of wrong. It doesn't announce itself. It moves quietly, like water finding a crack, and if you're not paying attention, it gets all the way through before you notice. I was paying attention. That's the part I want to be honest about, because it matters. It wasn't luck that I found those signs. It was 40 years of careful habits. Writing things down, noticing what's out of place, not dismissing small irregularities because they're inconvenient to think about. Wisdom isn't something that arrives one day like a package on your porch. It builds. It builds from every time you chose to stay calm when you wanted to react. Every time you traced a problem to its source instead of patching the symptom. Every time you picked up a pen and wrote down a date and a time because you knew it might matter later. That discipline, that willingness to think before acting, is what protected me. Not anger, not confrontation. Careful, deliberate thought. And then there's the harder part. The part about not falling apart, because I want to be clear. Finding out that your own daughter was coming into your home to build a case against your mental capacity, that is not a small thing to carry. There were nights between finding that broken tape and sending Howard's letter where I sat in my reading chair and felt something I don't have a clean word for. Not rage. Something heavier. A kind of sorrow with sharp edges. The kind that makes you want to give up on the whole project of trusting people. I didn't give up. I kept going. I made my appointments. I signed my documents, I changed my locks, and I sat on this porch and watched the light go down and got up the next morning and did the next thing. That's not heroism. That's just what you do when you've decided that your life is worth protecting and that no one else is going to do it for you. Melissa is still my daughter. I haven't closed that door. But I also haven't pretended the thing that happened didn't happen, and I won't. Because pretending would be its own kind of cowardice, and I've worked too long and too hard to live in ways I don't respect. The tree will bloom again next year. I'll be here to see it.